Hello and welcome back to another episode of Rapping with the Rep. I'm State Representative Ken Gordon, and I'm here with the Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development, Rachel Kaprielian. Welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. So we're going to talk a little bit about your department. Can you tell us about the Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development? What does it do and what do you do?
Sure. Well, as you know, I was a former state representative, and after that I went over to the Registry of Motor Vehicles as the Registrar of Motor Vehicles. And earlier this year, in January, I was appointed the Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development. So the good news is that when I got over there, a lot of the issues that were kind of, hot
Right.
on the docket when I got there are things that were not unfamiliar to me. Minimum wage, unemployment insurance reform, workforce training, aligning our workforce training systems and programs in Massachusetts with what the actual jobs are. Things that were important when I first took public office more than 20 years ago. Are still the same issues of the day. You just kind of change a little bit of the terms and some of the players, but at the end of the day, it's about getting people to work, making sure that they're compensated fairly, and in a way that they can sustain a real living, and making sure that the skill sets we have out in the world actually match up to the jobs we have out in the world.
Well, the governor had a lot of trust in you because he knew that heading in from day one, you were really in the hot seat. Minimum wage was a front burner issue for the governor and for us in the legislature.
Yes.
And we were able to get that done.
It was a huge accomplishment, and the legislature is enormously credited with how that all evolved. And as you remember, earlier in this year, no one knew where that was going to go, or really how, was it going to pass? What would the number be? I would argue that in January, we wouldn't have thought that we would get to $11 an hour. It didn't feel like that then, and that was many months of discussions and gathering data and convincing colleagues and convincing the public and convincing stakeholders that was the right way to go. And to have done that minimum wage at the level we did it is a terrific accomplishment of the administration and the legislature.
Right. Our viewers may remember that at one of our earlier shows we had Chairman Tom Conroy here, and we were discussing minimum wage when at that time there were a number of moving parts. Mm-hmm. We had the Senate's version, we had the House version, we had a ballot question, all of them a little bit different.
Yep.
And eventually we were able to negotiate with all sides to bring together a compromise.
And the whole part about unemployment insurance reform, was it going to be taken up? Was it going to be taken up as part of the same bill? Where were we going to go with that? Was it going to change the number of weeks into the trust? Was it going to change the per employee
Right.
charge to employers? So that being able to accomplish some of that reform in addition to the minimum wage is a double accomplishment because it was a very important measure to the business community.
It really was. It could answer the question, well, how are we going to afford this? So many people that I spoke with, business people, said, we understand why in Massachusetts people can't make $8 an hour for working a full-time job, that they shouldn't be working a full-time job while at the same time they're eligible for public benefits. We've got to get them up and out of poverty. While at the same time, some small business people said, but I can't afford that. The unemployment insurance reform really addresses that and helps small business, especially those that don't use the unemployment insurance system as often as some bigger companies. And we're able to do that hand in hand.
Exactly, and it makes a critical difference. And you mentioned small businesses, and most employers in Massachusetts are what is defined as a small business, which are 50 employees or fewer. So to them, the per employee charge and the hundreds of dollars made a huge difference. So the business community is claiming great victory in some of their influence in making sure that that was a reform that happened this session. So you can't really be pro-jobs without being very mindful of what's important to employers.
Right. And so that our viewers understand, what we passed was a law in which the minimum wage will go from $8 to $12 an hour over 3 years. So the increase will be to $9 in January, to $10 in January of 2015, and eventually to $11.
Exactly, 11 being and putting us at the highest minimum wage in the country.
That's right. That's right.
Which is a great thing because that says that we ensure that minimum wage ought to be far more sustainable than it is at the 8 level.
That's right. At the same time, there was a lot of discussion about people who are tipped, work for jobs that include tips, waiters, waitresses, and other people. They have a minimum that they're paid, although they're all entitled to make minimum wage.
Yes.
So what they have an upfront payment, which was $2.63. That'll go up to $3.75.
Yep.
And at the end of the week, if they're not, at the end of the pay period, if they don't make minimum wage, they're entitled to the difference. But this gives them a little bit of a boost so that especially in some of the businesses, they'll be a little bit better off.
It gives them a boost, and it also, puts it a little bit more in keeping with times. In 1990, when I graduated from college, I got a waitressing job, and that was my tipped wage, $2.63. That was 24 years ago. So the time has come where we need to look to see how we're managing, sort of the basic needs for those slow nights that happen. Like I know that when there's a storm event, I mean, you go to work for a week and you won't be able to sustain any kind of paycheck. So that will help a lot of those workers.
It really will. And it sort of dovetails into an experience I had last week that I'm still happy about, which is that there was an issue that was really not included. It was left out of the bill that was sent to the governor, which was called uniform wage compliance. And that was a way of making minimum wage, those people earning minimum wage, giving them an avenue to enforce their rights to minimum wage. Currently, they have an abbreviated time to bring any claim if they're not paid their wages. They have less time than anybody else. We intended for that to be in the bill that was sent to the governor, but it just wasn't there. When I realized it wasn't there, I was advised by some that, well, these things might happen. But I talked to the Senate. We put a separate bill through. It came through the Senate. It passed 38-0.
That is a tremendous accomplishment, and no doubt you were a great leader on that subject. And as you know, and as I know, having been a state rep, if you have the merits of a bill, you have the zeal of seeing it passed, anything can happen. And that is those are hard-fought battles, and to get something in at literally not just the 11th hour, but the post-11th hour, is a remarkable accomplishment. And it does go hand in hand with what we tried to do with the minimum wage, because sort of the enforcement parts of it and the sort of timeliness of how you bring some of these matters up in a real way might seem a little less glamorous, a little less flashy, but I promise you are every bit as important to that minimum wage worker.
Yeah, that's right. Tell the minimum wage worker who hasn't been paid and then is told by a lawyer, well, that's too bad because you lost your rights, because really reasonably or meaningfully there was no way for you to get to court in the first place.
It makes it so much more comprehensive, and that is important, because then you would have had to mop it up sometime in the next session, and instead you were far better served in the legislature, and the minimum wage workers and the Commonwealth was better served that you worked it so it would be a companion piece. So kudos to you, Representative Gordon.
Well, I appreciate that, Secretary. Another bill that we passed that the governor signed was the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
And that was very meaningful to me. That gives people who work in other people's homes, nannies and people who care for for seniors and others, some assurance that at least to some extent, to some level, their needs are going to be met. They have a right to a written contract now, so their rights are set forth, and they have a right to some level of time, personal time, and communication, contact with their family. That was important.
Tremendously important. And there are a lot of these domestic workers around the state, and they are doing, as you mentioned, really some of the hardest, most humane work that there is, caring for someone who's elderly who can't get themselves dressed or bathed. It's taking care of other people's children. Typically, and there wasn't much protecting them, and this is putting them in alignment with everybody else. It doesn't matter if you work in someone's home or if you work at a corporation or in an organization. You have basic rights to breaks, to days off, to leave if you are sick. Things that these workers did not have prior to this bill, and I know that you were also very involved in seeing that through, and that's been kicking around for a number of years, and again has gotten through the goal line, and those hundreds of thousands of workers will now be protected.
It was so satisfying to be able to attend both of the signing ceremonies where the governor signed those into law. You spoke at those ceremonies. It was great to see people look at them in the eye and realize that we've had a difference in the lives of people who depend on us.
Well, the governor said it well. I mean, it's like these are people that are inside other people's homes for the most part, and it's like, and he said something to the effect of, I see you. And this is all of us saying that we see you. We value the work that you do. The work that they do is, some of the most important, meaningful work there is in the world. Right. And now they're able to be treated with some dignity, with respect, and under the law.
Right. They're caring for our children, they're caring for our seniors, and they're caring for our families in a way that others can now go to work and contribute in a different way.
Yes, that is a very good point, because this is not rich people necessarily that have people who live in their homes. It's people who need others to help them with caregiving. And that is all kinds of constructs around that. And the growing area is elderly. People are able to stay in their home mercifully longer than they might have if they have a domestic care worker there to attune to their needs.
Absolutely. Now, you just issued a report dealing with the underground economy.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
We
That was
issued a
fascinating.
report, and on top of that report, it was some years ago, there was an executive order having a joint task force on the underground economy, which is basically entities that don't play by the rules, don't pay into unemployment insurance taxes, don't cover workers' comp, aren't following the rules and leveling the field for everybody else. So this joint task force, went after these scofflaws and, then made sure that they were coming into compliance to the tune of $55 million. Wow. That is big money. Wow. That is real money. And it is on the side of the angels because these are people who were breaking the law, skirting the rules, and making it unfair for everybody else.
Right.
So if you're not paying in for workers' comp, someone gets injured, they're now tapping the trust fund, which is paid for by everybody else. That's and right. All of us. So not only did we, have all this, wonderful news to report from the Joint Task Force, the executive order was codified into law as part of the minimum wage unemployment insurance bill, so that it will not be undone with the next administration. So that this is now in statute and in law, so that this money for scofflaws will continue to be collected and hopefully have fewer entities trying to scam the system.
That's great.
Yeah.
You know who else it helps? Are businesses that are doing it the right way.
Absolutely.
Because they're competing with other businesses that aren't.
Yeah,
and
who can undercut a price because they're not paying for stuff.
Right, and they've come to us and say, yeah, we can't compete with those companies. We all should be playing by the rules, and then we compete fairly and not unfairly.
Yeah. And another little goodie in our minimum wage unemployment insurance law was OSHA-like rules that now cover everybody in Massachusetts. This is a bill and an executive order that has been kicking around for 40 years. So again, it had a ton of support from stakeholders, from members of the legislature, from workers, from unions, and now in Massachusetts, the coverage for people on the job and public safety has, gone up several notches so that it is even with federal OSHA. And this is saving life and limb, saving tons of money in medical costs and in workers' comp, and is, again, I kind of got lost in the fervor and the din of all that we did with minimum wage and unemployment insurance and the underground economy, but it is another tremendous accomplishment of this legislature and the governor.
There really was a lot that happened all at once, all in the past month or two.
Yeah.
That brought it. Was there a change in the climate, do you think? Is there something responsible for how bills that session after session didn't make it over that goal line and suddenly did?
What a good question that is, and that's sort of something that would be a longer conversation. But I served in the legislature for a long time, and you've been there a number of years. Sometimes there's a climate of just making things better for a certain segment or a certain subject, and I think that there was a lot of determination to do better for the worker. And all these bills that we mentioned are better for the Massachusetts worker, particularly for workers who work hourly, who are trying to cobble together schedules to eke out a reasonable living.
Right.
And I think it was a great victory for sort of working Massachusetts residents, working families, and it just were a number of terrific initiatives that came together in a great legislative package.
Where it struck me was that we have a problem in this Commonwealth with homelessness.
Yes.
And that is visiting the suburbs. It's here in this district we have motels that handle transitional families. And people have called to me or emailed me and said, well, why can't you help find these people work, or why can't these people work? And 29% of people who are living in these situations are working.
Yes.
They're working minimum wage jobs. It's
Yeah.
not enough. They still qualify.
Yeah.
They are working.
Yeah.
And so they have to be able to do better.
Well, it's a lot of this, sort of bigger conversations about income inequality. And there was a really powerful piece written recently that I read that said that the low-wage jobs now are a lot lower wage than the low-wage jobs a generation ago.
Right.
So they're paying less. And so minimum wage, you can't support a family on a minimum wage job. And so what do we do about that? How do we find constructs that help people kind of go into more meaningful, more lucrative work?
Right. And then when we talk about the competition business to business, when we raise the minimum wage and we raise it for everyone in the Commonwealth, it means that competitively speaking, no company is at a disadvantage. Everyone else is paying that minimum as well.
It's a very important point. And you know, and so at some level, the argument is, well, the consumer will pay more. Well, you know, the data I've seen on that is that it's really de minimis. I mean, you're not paying a lot more to pay your workers a little bit more reasonably.
Right.
So the data doesn't quite play out.
No, we know
that way.
about the stimulus effect of more money in
Yes,
circulation,
more spending.
and we've raised the minimum wage before. It's nothing new to us, so we
Yes.
can look back at the data to see, did this create inflation? And it hasn't
Yeah.
in the
Well,
past.
it was not indexed, but the whole sort of idea around indexing is that you have to revisit this every few years, and that is what has happened with the minimum wage. You see sort of where you are in a moment in time and in a moment in your economy, and is this a good time to consider raising the minimum wage, which is why it's revisiting it every few years, as it should be.
Right.
Even if you decide not to raise it, it should be revisited every few years.
Right, that's correct. So another issue that's coming up, looking into the future a little bit down the road, is we've got a ballot question, number 4, and that's going to deal with earned sick time.
Yes.
Currently, workers don't have a state law right to work towards sick time, and this ballot question will require companies to offer up to 40 hours, really 1 week a year,
Yeah.
to full-time workers,
Yeah.
based on the amount of time they work. Businesses that have 10 or fewer employees, it'll be unpaid. 11 or more, it'll be paid.
Yeah.
What's the sense of the administration, or your sense of that issue?
Well, it'll be interesting because it is a campaign, and will the ballot question supporters be able to convince enough people in Massachusetts if that is a worthy goal? I think that I haven't seen the polling, but my guess is that most people who are working have paid sick time.
Right.
So you wonder sort of like, is that a matter of fairness to anybody else? Because nobody plans to be sick. There's all kinds of mechanisms you can put in place to make sure that that's not being abused. So it'll be an interesting thing that happens. I mean, I don't know, kind of where the public come down. And campaigns are funny things, and elections are funny things. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if it was something that gathered a lot of people's interest and imagination.
Yeah, and where this comes down, and this being my first term, I've had a lot of these issues where we deal with legislation, and I talk to people and they say, I thought this already was the law.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that our workers already have a right to earn sick time, so they don't have to come to work sick.
Yeah. Well, that's another good point. I mean, if I'm at a restaurant, I don't want someone who's giving me my hamburger to be sick, or someone who's an aide in my child's school who can infect other people. I mean, it does affect the people who are paid the least and who are hourly workers and who really cobble together schedules to live paycheck to paycheck. It's not an issue for sort of higher income people.
Right.
That's why probably a lot of people don't know that a lot of people are not paid when they get sick.
No, and you're right. So therefore, if they're asked, how would you feel if you knew that the person who just made your sandwich
Right.
is ill?
Yeah.
I think most people would say that's not particularly something I want to have continue.
They should include that question in the poll when they're polling this question. I think they might see different results.
That's right.
From many skeptics.
That's right. What are some of the other issues that you're working on in the executive office now?
Well, I think it's called labor and workforce development, and that to me is the part of the job that I find the most invigorating and exciting. There's a lot of ways we need to consider if we have the right skill sets going on in Massachusetts and if we have people being trained. In a lot of states, their community college system are sort of like the front line of training. We need to see more of that. It needs to align to people's schedules. It needs to be teaching the skills for where those jobs are. I think if you have a lot, and these are not often kids, who
Right.
are going to the community colleges. They're in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, looking for a job that will pay them in a reasonable way. And we've got a lot of industry in our economy looking for those workers. Advanced manufacturing is a perfect example. Estimates say that there'll be 100,000 openings in the next 10 years for advanced manufacturing. A lot of that advanced manufacturing are below what are called middle skills jobs, which are below a master's degree, that in some cases are 18 to 24-month training programs that you train it, you learn it, you go into an advanced manufacturing firm, and your paycheck is in the $50,000, $60,000 range. That is a ticket to the middle class, and that's the kind of workforce training we need to be thinking about almost obsessively, of
Right.
how we're going to make sure that our workers coming in have that training so we can plug them into those jobs that are ready and available
So one
today and later.
That's right. One of the most exciting things that I've experienced serving as state rep, has been the number of ribbons that I've cut in the past 2 years. High-tech companies are coming in,
Yep.
and the companies that then service the needs of those high-tech companies, like restaurants and other businesses, come in with them.
Yeah.
And I've asked the people who are operating these companies when I go, well, why'd you come here? And the answer is what you just said.
Yeah.
It's the educated workforce.
Educated workforce, and it is not. And this is what I want to say to like everybody who doesn't have a PhD or a master's degree. I've been going to visit, pharmaceutical companies, biotechs. They have many openings for, say, a lab assistant,
Right.
which you can get a lab assistant training course at Bunker Hill Community College, and you get in with a career ladder that pays you in a reasonable way. So it isn't, PhDs in lab coats. There are a ton of positions available for people if they're ready and willing to be trained. And I submit people are ready and willing to be trained if they see what that training means, if they know that there's a job at the end of it, and if they know that that's a career that they can grow in.
That's right, that's right. And not only that, we've got our high schools and we've got our regional high schools, our technical high schools.
And Voc-Techs, yes.
Voc-Techs.
Voc-Techs they are really banging it out. I mean, they have figured out what industry needs. Not every single one of them, but many of them. And the ones around here, Minuteman Tech, Shawsheen Tech, they have really focused in on in-demand skill sets, and they are turning out kids. And they are, I consider, an 18-year-old still a kid, a 19-year-old still a kid, and they are often going right into work in good jobs, and many of them, go to school at the same time, but they are trained, and the feedback on their level of training, their attitude, their hard skills, their soft skills are tremendous.
Yes.
They are doing great work in the Voc schools.
Yes, and I think you hit the nail on the head, because we do have the MIT trained people, we do have people coming from Harvard and BU, but they've all got mid-level jobs open for the students that come out of the other schools, and they're looking for those, and there are more openings at that level for people with that education, and we offer that.
And we are a diversified economy in Massachusetts, thank goodness. I mean, a lot of states have, they'll have natural resources, or they're heavy on one industry or another. And Massachusetts has recovered much better from most recessions because of this more diversified economy. And we have regional economies as well, like Cape Cod's economy is not the Berkshires, is not the 128 belt. They're all very different, but they all have important skill sets that we need to make sure we are competitive with regionally.
Right.
And we're way ahead of the country, right? The average, the unemployment rate is not too terrible right now federally at 6.2. Massachusetts is 5.5.
It is.
Burlington, 4.5, 4.1.
I think 4.4.
4.4, 4.1. I'm mixing up which one of your communities is which,
Right.
but you're in the fours everywhere.
Yes, yes.
And that's really tremendous. I mean, that
Yes.
just says that your district has people who are working in in-demand fields and in steady work.
Yes, he's right. And it's in the top 15%. Burlington and Bedford are both in the top 15% of the state, and the state is one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country.
Yep.
And it's because of, like you say, the tech work.
And it's the big picture too. I mean, the governor has said for 8 years that our focus is going to be on investing in education, innovation, and infrastructure. That is a troika that has played out and paid off, because the long view is really very important when you're a government leader, and ensuring that you are preparing for the future, such that we have more jobs now than we had since 1990. More people are working in Massachusetts than in 1990. We have recovered 2 recessionary periods better than when we were before.
Right. And we just passed some legislation, now it's headed to the governor now, dealing with the folks that are at that mid-level who, because of our technology economy, sometimes their skills become a little obsolete. The company they're working for may have laid them off because their tech skills are not needed at that company, but they've had a successful career, and all they have to do is learn maybe another platform, maybe another way of operating the experience they've got.
Another great place for our community college system, because we are now living in an era, in an economy where a person is always going to have to be changing and improving their skills and adding to their skills. A worker in this day and age is never done learning.
Right.
And some of that is the responsibility of the employers to make sure that they're keeping their workers up, but it's also up to the worker. When I was a senior at Watertown High School, I took a class in computers, and it was COBOL programming, okay? COBOL programming is like, the way of the dinosaur.
Right.
So luckily I'm not in computer tech, but if I learned COBOL, back ways and forward ways, that wouldn't help me today.
Correct.
So that is an attitude that I think most workers have adopted. Certainly the younger worker knows to be true, that you're always changing. It's a global economy. We're competitive with the whole world, and we have to make sure that we have our skill sets in check.
Right. And we've got a wonderful one-stop career center right here in Woburn that has available to it all of these resources and can help people find the direction that they need to get these advantages.
Exactly. We have a career center in Woburn, and we have another 32 statewide. So when a person is unemployed and they are collecting unemployment insurance, they are required to, sign up for one of our classes there, where we have a whole host of things, like if you want to be trained to be a lab tech, we'll tell you where you can go, what the hours are, and how it gets paid for. We will help you rewrite your resume. A lot of people hadn't done a resume in a long time that we see in the career centers. We will rework it and rewrite it. How do you create a LinkedIn profile? Have you done Excel in the latest version? Here's a class in Excel. So those career centers are free, are current, and in many cases are almost like concierge service to our customer in helping them find their next career.
Right.
And soon we're going to be also launching in September a career readiness initiative that is now going to certify workers at skill set levels, that is aligning with sort of the federal government and with other big industry. So you could be certified as a bronze, silver, gold, platinum skill set, so that if I'm the owner of a company and I need 10 programmers and I need them at the gold level, I have 10 certified gold level people who were certified at our career centers, at community colleges, at one of 100 learning labs that seek to certify that person and help them build on those skills and do better.
And that's just a
Career Readiness Initiative.
Right, and it's a wonderful help to the employee and to the employer,
Yes.
who knows how to identify them as an
all
incentive to come in.
It's all there for the public, and this is what we do at Labor and Workforce Development in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and what the legislature has helped enable us to happen.
Well, these are all great programs, and it's great work that you're doing. So I appreciate your having stopped by. It's been a great show and a great conversation. The time just flew by.
It always does.
It does.
We're doing great things on Beacon Hill, and I think it's definitely a session where you should certainly look back and be very proud of all that's been accomplished.
Well, thank you, and thank you for coming. Secretary Rachel Kaprielian, thank you for coming on Rapping with the Rep. I'm State Representative Ken Gordon. Thank you for joining us.